You can see me, I'm several inches shorter than the other people that were talking. Yeah, it's usually a big deal that I just show up at something like this, so this time I'm going to talk because I actually really care about this issue a lot. So imagine that you own this beautiful piece of land in the countryside. For me, it would be somewhere in the Hudson River Valley. This piece of land has been in your family for generations, and you really love it. But one day you find out, lo and behold, it's got gold under it. And much as you love this land, you're saying, hey, I really could use the money, so I got to try and mine this gold. So you bring in a miner, and the guy says, okay, let's make an agreement. And you say, I'm easy, you know, I just want to get paid fairly for my gold and don't destroy my property unnecessarily. And otherwise you write the agreement, you know. So he comes back the next day with the agreement. You don't even look at it. You just sign on the bottom line. So he starts the mining, and before long, he's doing unbelievable, unimaginable damage to the property that you love. Everything you loved about it is gone. Every day he's carting off truckloads of gold ore. And yet every day you're running to the mailbox and you don't find that big check you were waiting for. Pretty soon you start to understand you've made a really bad deal for selling your gold. This is very similar to the situation Armenia is in right now. The laws governing gold mining, or every kind of mining in Armenia, were basically, in the old administration, written by the same guys who were the primary beneficiaries of the mines. In that kind of scenario, do you think they were spending a lot of time trying to think how they could make the mining arrangement with the country serve the interests of the Armenian people to the best extent? No, they were thinking about their own personal interests, and the laws reflect that. So I'll give you a couple examples just to give you an idea about kind of how bad the laws are. So Varat mentioned the mining inspection checklist. And this is a checklist which is mandated by law that the inspectors have to use when they go to inspect a mine. And their reporting has to be done on this checklist. So imagine that we've got this new administration. They hire some excited young guys to go out and start inspecting mines. They run out to the first mine and wow, they see right away this mine is dumping waste directly into the river in violation of the law. So they pull out the mining inspection sheet, look at page 1, look through page 2, look through page 3, and they're shocked to find there's no place on this form they can report this violation of the law. And because there's no place on the report, they can't report it, and because it can't be reported, action can't be taken against the mine. This is part of what Varat refers to as a system designed to fail. Now, on the other hand, the economic provisions. If you look at the headline provisions, the royalty rate, the taxation rate, you come away saying, oh, well, compared to other countries, this is not a bad arrangement. The country ought to be happy, the miners ought to be happy. But you just dig down a little bit into the law and you find out there's one loophole after another that enable them to avoid paying that kind of rate. And then in the accounting and other practices of the mining companies, there's a whole other range of things they can do in order to avoid paying. In the end, what they end up paying is a small fraction of what you'd expect by looking at those headline numbers. So overall, what we've got is a system where the mining causes way too much damage to the country. On the other hand, it pays way too little revenue. Armenia's getting a really bad deal for the sale of the mining assets of the country. So, next point. Saved by the bell, right. So, we can't afford to have a really bad deal for mining. I mean, as attractive as it is on the face of it to think about just shutting down mining because of all the damage it's causing, because of all the damage it's causing, we can't afford to because the minerals, the gold, the molybdenum, the copper that are being mined are really the oil that we have to exploit for the growth of the nation. The resources can provide the income that can fund our defense, our education, healthcare, infrastructure. We need the revenue from mining, but we have to do it under a scenario where it's beneficial for the nation. So, 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I started the Mining Legislation Reform Initiative, kind of with an inkling of all of this. And the idea was to create new laws governing mining that would make mining a good deal for the country of Armenia and its people. It would require them to pay the maximum amount of revenue for the minerals they extract and do the least amount of harm to the nation. So at that time, it was under the old administration. A lot of people thought this was really silly. They wanted to pull me aside and say, James John, you have this wonderful innocence about you and this endless optimism, and you're just criminally naive sometimes, though. And do you really think that the same guys who are benefiting from the mining laws just the way they are going to be happy to see you show up with a whole new range of laws that are going to take the money out of their pocket? Are you crazy? Looking back on it, they had a point. But there's a saying I've heard before that I like to cling to sometimes, which is something to the effect that God provides special care for idiots and little children. And I think it was kind of under that provision that this amazing miracle happened last year that sort of makes MLRI look much better than it did 3 years ago. We got a new government, a new revolution came along. This government actually cares about trying to do what's good for the country. And it's a whole new game then for MLRI. The government actually they know they have a big problem with mining now. And the problem is they're being crushed from three sides, three competing kind of interests. On the one hand, they've got activists, communities, and a big part of the population of Armenia who just want to shut down mining because it's so detrimental in terms of its impact. On the other hand, they've got the mining companies with their huge resources, foreign governments behind them and international organizations behind them, demanding the government to remove the obstacles and let mining continue. And then to make it all worse, what the government really desperately needs is revenue. They're starving for revenue and they know mining can provide it. So they know that the laws need to change. The problem is it takes a lot of work in order to prepare to write new laws. As Varant was saying, research and analysis of the old laws to identify the gaps in the legislation, finding out best practices from other countries, assembling experts, creating a team, all of this can take years. And the government needs to act now to have new legislation. Well, fortunately, that's all the kind of work that MLRI has been doing for these last 3 years. So we are ready right now to start writing new laws and to pass them into law. We figure that within 12 months we can write the laws. The rest of next year we can spend creating oversight mechanisms, because the last thing we want to do is create a bunch of laws that don't end up really having an impact on environmental practices and revenues. We can do that within the next 2 years. So what's all this going to cost? For the last 3 years, we've been spending about $100,000 a year on MLRI, doing all this background work. And this has been funded 50% by me and 50% by Tony Berberian in Boston, a great Armenian guy who actually is from the mining industry, joined me from day one in this project, and he's been half partner in it. So we are ready now to go into the drafting phase and the final phase of the project. And we figure it's a budget of about $200,000 a year now. That's a total of about $400,000 for the next 2 years to finish this project. So I stand back and I say, okay, $400,000, is that a lot or is it a little? Well, put it in context of going back to when I started this idea. And we're in the old regime, we've got a very negative climate to operate in. We have maybe a 5% chance of actually being able to pass this. At that time, I still was able to look and say, okay, but look, if we succeed, if we eliminate the negative impact of mining on the environment, on communities, on agriculture, on health, that's a huge benefit for the country. And going to the revenue side, imagine that with better laws, we can get tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of extra revenue for the government every year. This is revenue that can be used for defense and infrastructure and education and healthcare and everything else the country needs. This starts to look like an unbelievable deal. For a few $100,000, even with a relatively low chance of succeeding, we can accomplish this much benefit for the country. So now, with this new regime, with the chances of passing it hugely better, we're looking at the same kind of risk-reward, the same kind of rewards, but the risks are much less. So I asked myself, in that environment, like, you know, if it cost us $20 million to achieve this benefit, would that be a lot? To get tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for the government to eliminate the negative impacts of mining? I don't think so. I think that would be a great deal. Or if it was 10 million, even better. Or if it was 2 million, even better. So we're talking about $400,000. Putting it in the context of my own work in Armenia, over the last 26 years, I've started carpet industry and built hotels and done some nonprofit work. If I put together the benefit of all those and give it my wildest optimistic calculation of the impact that's had on the country, it doesn't begin to approach the benefit that can come from passing new mining laws. Kind of reminds me of like being a social investing analog to being an early stage investor in Microsoft or Amazon or Google, where, you know, 10, 20 years later, you're looking back and saying, we had a 20,000 time return on our investment. We had a 100,000 time return on our investment. And if you're a financial investor, this is what you dream of, you know, getting that investment and putting the money in your pocket. In this case, we're talking about getting that kind of a return potentially and having the benefit flow into the country. For me, that's even better. So when I stand back and look at it, I probably would say that this, if we manage to pass this, it'll be probably the best thing I ever did in my life. So if any of you are impressed with the idea, if you're moved, motivated, if you think this is a great way to invest in the country and to help out, I'd be really happy if you join me in funding it. And as much as that, I'd really like to think that when that day comes when we pass the legislation and me and my MLRI team are standing together with hugging each other and big smiles on our face, that you're there with us. Like sharing in the satisfaction, sharing in the pride, and thinking, wow, we really did something good for the country. Thanks.